Good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you all very much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar. My name is Diarmuid Torney. I am Chair of Future Earth Ireland and an Associate Professor at the School of Law and Government in Dublin City University. I will be chairing today's panel discussion. Before introducing today's panelists, I would like to say a few words about Future Earth Ireland and about this webinar series. Future Earth is a global network of scientists, researchers and innovators that aims to provide the knowledge needed to support transformations towards sustainability. Future Earth Ireland, convened by the Royal Irish Academy, is the national committee of Future Earth and is composed of members from a diverse range of academic disciplines, as well as from industry and policymaking. Today's webinar is the second in a series of 3 webinars co-hosted by Future Earth Ireland this spring on the theme, How can higher education build forward better? Across these 3 webinars, we aim to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our perception of what changes in society are feasible and what this radically changed landscape means for how higher education institutions on the island of Ireland and beyond can contribute to the transition to a sustainable future. Our first webinar focused on research and innovation. Today, we are focusing on how higher education can engage with wider society on sustainability transformations. Our final webinar on 28th of April will focus on teaching and learning. Today's webinar is co-hosted by Future Earth Ireland and the Sustainability Office at Dublin City University. I am very grateful to my DCU colleagues, Samantha Fahy, DCU Sustainability Manager, who joins us as a panelist today, and Caroline Moran, as well as Jennifer Keneally from the Royal Irish Academy for all their work to organise today's webinar. We are joined today by a range of expert panelists from both within and outside of higher education. Samantha Fahy is the Sustainability Manager in Dublin City University. Dr. Su-Ming Khoo is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science and Sociology at NUI Galway. Professor Karl Ledecker is Senior Vice Principal at the University of Aberdeen. Dr. Sabrina Dekker is Climate Action Coordinator with Dublin City Council. And Lynda Sullivan is Activism and Community Officer with Friends of the Earth Northern Ireland. Our discussion will begin with a set of opening contributions from each of our 5 panelists. I have asked panelists to limit their opening remarks to 3 to 5 minutes in order to allow plenty of time for discussion among the panel thereafter. We will be taking questions from the audience, and I would encourage you to use the chat function on Zoom to pose questions to our panel. If you are tweeting about this afternoon's webinar, please use the hashtag HEIs. I'll begin the conversation with Samantha Fahy. Samantha has over 20 years of experience in the management and administration of high technology research projects. In 2012, she took on the part-time role of Sustainability Manager at DCU, and in June 2013, she moved full-time to this role. Sam, you have a bird's eye view of sustainability initiatives within DCU, as well as across the higher education sector through your work with the Irish Universities Association. What do you think are the key challenges facing higher education in both embedding sustainability in their practices and working with wider society in this area?
Thank you, Diarmuid. I guess thank you for inviting me to participate in this event today, and also for that very interesting question. And I think the challenges are great, but I guess given the time I have, I would like to address maybe 2 of them, particularly understanding and approach. And so in general, I think there is a lack of understanding as to what sustainability means, and that's still there since I started working in sustainability 10 years ago. And I guess from a HEI perspective, I see it as having 2 sides. So I think we must understand the physical limitations of the planet we are living on and the impacts that we are having pushing that planet, our planet, outside of its safe boundaries within which it currently operates. So this kind of like environmental sustainability issues. I think we also must seek to teach our graduates sustainability competencies. So the competencies like systems thinking or critical thinking or futures thinking. And perhaps not just to our graduates, but we need to embed these competencies in all society so that everybody needs to understand, because we're all on the same planet trying to deal with the same sustainability challenge. I guess we all need to know, about our interconnectedness and how we are linked to everybody else, and our impacts internationally and intergenerationally, so that what we do here has an impact internationally and what we do now has an impact intergenerationally. And I guess it is how those interdependencies are also linked with the systems of social, cultural, economic environment and how we must balance these. And I guess over the years, the number of academics working in HEIs has, with an understanding of this broader sense of sustainability, has increased. But I would still say that there's a large cohort who are unaware of the urgency or the scale with which we need to change to actually address the sustainability challenge. And their need to actually amend or adapt or change their current programs to actually ensure that sustainability is addressed through all programs within the university, irrespective of what we're teaching, whether it's nurses, engineers, teachers, everybody needs to understand these challenges. And I guess on the aspect of the challenge of approach, so how we actually will deal with this, I think we need to do top down and bottom up. And I guess, in my opinion, we need to do both, and we need to do both very urgently. And these are, there's significant signs that this is progressing. So we can see the large swell, groundswell of a movement from the ground up, led by the likes of Greta Thunberg and the organizations like Extinction Rebellion that have got, climate change and sustainability on the highest agendas across the globe. And we can also see that in Ireland, with our youth movement, with Fighters for Futures, and their call for the right and rightly insisting that we address sustainability issues now. I guess we have it from the top down as well, in some ways, in that we have this new climate bill from Ireland, and while it might not be perfect, it will hopefully allow us to demonstrate our leadership through its implementation. So that as we implement the actual measures defined in the bill, that we can actually show leadership on that. But I guess if we look at the HEIs, I think at the moment our senior managers and the challenges that they are facing in just trying to get the show back on the road, given what we've come through with the COVID-19, and to get us back to normal, that I fear that a lot of their focus has moved away from the actual requirement that we're going to have to change this business model, this current business as usual model that we're using, and we're going to have to change it radically if we're actually going to meet the challenge of climate change. So I think the big challenge that they have is, when do they get time to step back a little from the competition on the dance floor and consider how an alternative, maybe collaborative approach across the entire system might be brokered to create a better future. And I'll finish there. Hopefully staying within 5 minutes.
Thanks very much for that, for those opening remarks, Sam. Next, I'll move to Dr. Su-Ming Khoo, who is a lecturer in the Department of Political Science and Sociology at NUI Galway, and also a former member of the Future Earth Ireland National Committee. Su-Ming has a strong research interest in and commitment to public scholarship, critical higher education studies, higher education for development, and global educational ethics. She is principal investigator on an IRC Coalesce project entitled Building Collaborative Approaches to University Strategies Against Exclusion in Ireland and Africa. Su-Ming, you have worked a lot on engaged higher education and scholarship. How do you go about this, and how do you think higher education institutions could perform that engagement function better?
So thanks very much for the invitation, Diarmuid, and for the kind introduction. So how do I go about with engagement? I go about it in this kind of ecology or jigsaw puzzle of the work that we do, which sets engagement with these other things that you've said, the other lectures, seminars in this series are going covered. You covered research already, that you were going to, this seminar is covering engagement, and there will be another seminar on teaching and learning. And the way in which I approach it is through this idea of integration. So engagement is linked to research and teaching through this idea of integration, which is a kind of inter and transdisciplinary approach that puts the different pieces of our scholarship, our research scholarship, our scholarship of teaching, and the scholarship of engagement, and making our research and teaching relevant in the context of what are the drivers for us coordinating what we are doing. And what I have in the middle of my jigsaw puzzle is this strange little picture of some termites. So I want you to start hearing these little termites chewing. And on the side.
Su-Ming, sorry to interrupt you. We're actually seeing the presenter view rather than the full screen view. So I think you need to change to, I think, is it the swap displays button in the top left will, the third button from the left.
Swap displays.
Yeah.
Okay, how's
perfect.
that?
That's
okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. So this is basic, sorry if you use up a moment. So this basically what I want you to think, suddenly hear this little background chewing noise that is chewing away, and then a kind of like a big termite mound kind of building up on the side as we hear this kind of chewing noise that is kind of making our research, our engagement and teaching a little bit hollow or brittle or fragile. Okay, I just want you to sort of hear this noise and see this termite mound building up. So, you've just asked this question, how could HEIs perform engagement better, right? And I think that what links this chewing noise, this hollowing, to the engagement piece is this question of performing better. Because performing better is not the same as engaging better. Performing better is hollowing out many of the norms, values, integrative ideas, and practices that we need to be able to engage better. Because better engagement requires diverse conceptions of quality, not monolithic or monologic conceptions of excellence, which is really what performance management is doing to us. Better engagement means we need epistemic conviviality. And why do we need it? The COVID-19 pandemic has exemplified the wickedness, the complexity of our societal problems. And in order to address wicked and complex societal problems, we mustn't neglect the diverse and multifaceted nature of higher education, and its specifically higher and educational roles. And that's what we need to invest in to engage better. We don't need to invest in more quantification for control or more quantification for competition. These are hollowing out our mission. And so to have public goods and public mission as the objective of collaborative and inter and transdisciplinary working, and we can see actually the pendulum is shifting back towards this, as was discussed in the Irish Universities Alliance event that was very interesting back in November. And in shifting the pendulum back, we have to bring back in and redress the carelessness of higher education, the lack of care, to bring professional solidarity back into higher education, and to bring ethics beyond the tick boxing approach of institutional research ethics review boards. Okay, just 30 seconds to finish then. How do I go about this engagement with convivial and collaborative networks, most of which have several collaborators, some of which have several hundred collaborators, networks, knowledge exchange partnerships, platforms like Convivial Thinking. We have a cost action ongoing at the moment on decolonizing development, African critical university studies, a critical internationalization knowledge exchange project and community, all of which center around solidarity and praxis methodologies. When we are asked to do things better, we're often asked to throw out the bathwater and remember, but don't throw out the babies. I want to remember that besides keeping the babies and throwing out bathwater, that there are elephants in our bathwater. These elephants are our friends, the things that we cannot forget, and the things that stay with us, our academic friendships, our collaborations, our partnerships, our peers who we learn from, our methods and our ethics. So some work that I've been doing, it's just too much to explain in a short time, but I hope I've given some idea then between the termites and the elephants and all the elephants' friends in the bath. If you throw out the bath water by all means, but keep your friends, the elephants, the warthog and the rhinoceros. Just stop the share here.
Su-Ming, thank you so much. We're only 2 speakers in, and we've already had dance floors, elephants, rhinoceroses, and termite mounds. So thank you very much for those provocative opening remarks, Su-Ming. I'll turn now to Professor Karl Ledecker, who has been Senior Vice Principal at the University of Aberdeen since March 2019. There, he is responsible for providing direct line management to all heads of school and has strategic oversight of the people, digital and estate strategies at the university. He is also a member of the Higher Education Futures Task Force, which has been convened by the Royal Irish Academy to explore framework options for future development of higher education across the island of Ireland. So, Karl, you're wearing 2 hats today, if I can put it like that, and we might come back to your role in senior management in a university in further questions. But my opening question to you is about your role in the Higher Education Futures Task Force. Can you tell us about the work of the task force so far and what kinds of themes are emerging from its work?
Yes, very happy to, and thanks very much for having me, and be delighted to come back to my role in higher education management, because the one thing you didn't mention, which is important, is that I'm also lead for sustainability at the University of Aberdeen, and I think that's probably why I'm part of this group, because I've been quite a strong voice for sustainability within the Higher Education Futures Task Force. So the task force was set up last September by Mary Canning, who's the president of the Royal Irish Academy, really as a response to the challenges to higher education from the pandemic. And what we've done is we've set up, I guess, 5 broad thematic areas that emerged from the early discussions that we had as a group. And those are across these following areas. So the first one is about a future vision for higher education and its value to society. I think we're thinking out to sort of 2035, that sort of time frame over the review. The second group subgroup that I'm involved in, the second theme, is models of higher education. So that's particularly looking at things like student engagement, teaching and learning, assessment, that sort of thing. So the education dimensions in particular, but not exclusively to that. The third area that the task force is looking at is about region and place. That's a major theme. The fourth one is equality, diversity and inclusion. And finally, we have a 5th group looking at research and innovation. So what the group has done in order to get input from as wide a variety of stakeholders as possible is that at the end of January, we opened a call for input across anyone who wanted to contribute, put out that call with a series of focused questions around these 5 themes and asked for responses. And that's now closed on the 5th of March. And we had about 70 submissions from range of higher education institutions, funding bodies, Irish government departments, research institutes, unions, and a series from individuals as well. And of course, from Future Earth Ireland as well, which was very pleasing to see. So now we're all looking at those inputs and beginning to sift through and seeing what's emerged from that feedback that we've received. And at the same time, the task force has been arranging a series of discussions with interested parties. So, for example, we've been talking to some higher education institutions. We've been talking to the Department of the Taoiseach, the Shared Island Unit, and of course the new Department of Further and Higher Education Research, Innovation and Science. So both those latter two bodies, as I understand it, new dimensions within the Irish political landscape, and important that we're solidly engaged with them. And I think they're engaging with us and very interested in our work and looking forward to what we're doing. Next stage is review the feedback. The 5 groups will each produce a position paper based on its own work and the feedback that it's received. They'll be published independently in the late summer, or looking to around July, and then there'll be an overarching report that pulls together all of the work of the task force that will be published later in the year. We're also going to hold a series of, we hope, seminars in the coming months to engage a little bit more as well. So lots of opportunities for people to get involved, and we're kind of now in that real thinking phase as to what we're actually going to produce, and then hopefully we'll produce some interesting results for people to get their teeth into and engage with mid-late summer.
Great, thanks very much for that overview, Karl. It's great to get a sense of the process and where things stand at the moment, and your plan of work ahead. And as I said, we'll have an opportunity to come back to your other role in the University of Aberdeen, hopefully in the discussion to come. Next, I will turn to Dr. Sabrina Dekker, who is Climate Action Coordinator with Dublin City Council and has responsibility there for implementation of Dublin City Council's Climate Change Action Plan. She holds a PhD in environmental policy from University College Dublin and has worked with CODEMA, Dublin's energy agency, and here in Dublin City University as a postdoctoral researcher. Sabrina, as someone with experience of both working in academia and working in policy in local government, how do you see the best way forward for engagement between the two?
Thanks, Dermot, and thank you for inviting me to be a panelist. Thank you for the question. I've been stewing about the answer for this all weekend and trying to formulate an elegant answer, and I've kind of come up with a personal short story after a little bit of reflection. And I don't think my career personally between academia and local government are accidental. Both for me have been intertwined, both accidentally and intentionally. Accidentally because I had to work to pay tuition, and lifeguarding was better than working in a fast food restaurant. So I started working in local government back home when I was 17. And then intentionally, I enjoyed working in local government and enjoyed engaging with public, and that kind of shaped how I ended up choosing my education. So I enjoy public service, but I also, what I love more is being able to take what I've learned in an academic setting into work. And just even in my first year of university, I was intent on finishing a science degree. And long story short to that, I ended up switching to social sciences, which is probably for the better in the end. But one of my favorite classes in first year university was physics. Ironically, because I loathed physics in high school, but my professor really made the subject come to life, especially at 9 a.m. in the morning. He would blow things up in class, so you really had all of our attention. But I think everything clicked for me at that stage, and what really helped is at work I was forced to teach water babies to parents, so infants under a year. And I actually ended up using my physics knowledge in class when I was teaching, and actually used the terms buoyancy, force, and displacement to explain to parents how the mechanics of floating, just to get them more comfortable with, letting go of their infant. So it worked for me. So when I think of how local government and higher education can work better together, I might be stating the obvious, but we need to remember that what is learned in the classroom will be and can be and should be applied in the work setting, or even more generally in life. And even for myself, my education path, as I mentioned, has been one that I've pursued with the intent of working in public service. Now, having said that, having experienced different education systems in Canada, Singapore, France, and Ireland, what can be learned or borrowed through my education experience, one thing I'll say is in my undergrad, I didn't have the pleasure of doing a work placement or even a practicum. Like, I had friends who were doing engineering degrees, and I was a bit jealous that they got to do work placements that actually were integrated into their curriculum so that they actually got the experience. So when I was doing my PhD research and went back to Vancouver and I learned about a program called City Studio, I was very jealous because it was a program that was designed to enable the City of Vancouver implement actions within its Greenest City Action Plan, which now is kind of world famous in essence. And what I really enjoy about learning about that program is that it's a two-way relationship, and it's all the tertiary institutions in Vancouver working with the city on Greenest City Action projects. And it could be that a group of students work on a project for a semester, or it could be, and they can go to the city and say, we have this idea, can we implement it? And then from the city, they learn the practical pieces of why a project may or may not work. And the example I was given at the time was the students had this project called Keys to the Street, and they put pianos on the corner of various streets. And they had to learn about insurance rules, about health and safety and everything just to get the pianos on the street. And of course, Vancouver rains far much more than it does in Ireland, but they actually did it. And it was a good learning experience for them. So having that and that introduction to what it is, the challenges that local government face is great. But the other thing that the program offered was if somebody in the city had a problem and they just didn't have the time, money, or resources to actually go hire a consultant, they could put the activity to a professor in another university, and they could actually have a group of students work on the project. So I think what I would love to see in Ireland is for that to happen. It will take time, and I think the good news is we do already have kind of partnerships in place. And I think one was great that DCU and DCC have an MOU, and now we have projects that DCU students are working on, and we also have UCD students working on projects, and I think that's great too. And the EU opportunity to apply for application for EU funding is another great way. I think just also maybe just to highlight, even when I was studying in Singapore and France, the capstone idea of like master's level students being given a project is also a great project. I know, Diarmuid, you're doing that with the DCU MSc students, and sometimes I have to apologize to them for that. But I think that's a great model. I think we need to keep building that relationship. We need to benefit from each other. And I know we always joke about academia being an ivory tower where these ideas come into place, but I think when you're on that pragmatic side, we need to have that imagination and those dreams and balance those two out. We need to coexist together to do this. And I think most importantly, we're talking about the future, and the students really are at the heart of this. They are the future workforce. Their ideas matter. And that's an important piece for us to kind of continue to work together. So I will finish there.
Great, Sabrina, thanks very much for that. Linking the metaphors and real world examples. I hope the babies that weren't being thrown out with the bathwater in Su-Ming's remarks were the babies that you were training in your younger life. But some really interesting thoughts there, and maybe we'll come back to some of those themes, Sabrina, around your experience indeed in other jurisdictions and what lessons we can learn. And finally, in this opening statement of our discussion, I'll turn to Lynda Sullivan, who is Activism and Community Officer with Friends of the Earth Northern Ireland. Lynda, from a civil society perspective, how easy or difficult do you find it to engage with the higher education sector on sustainability challenges? Are there ways, do you think, that collaboration could be better enabled?
Okay, thanks for the invite today. There's nothing for the nerves to come after a long line of doctors. Okay, so just for a bit of background on where I'm speaking from. I have my Friends of the Earth hat on, and particularly my work supporting communities across the island who are resisting extractivism, such as mining and fracking. But I also have on my hat as chair of the Centre for Global Education, whose work spans both the formal and informal education sectors in the north. And then also I have my activist hat, being involved in activist groups on the island, and also having spent 5 years accompanying peasant communities in the Peruvian Andes in their land and water rights struggles. So what I see as the underlying question of today's event, like how can academia better serve our current and future Earth? It's the same question that could be put to the NGO sector. And I believe that the answer is fundamentally the same. So to be relevant as NGOs, we must ask ourselves, like, how do we best support those on the front lines of social and social and environmental injustice? And how do we contribute to the solutions? So the answer, of course, is deep and complex. But for a start, we can stop propping up the system that's at the root of these injustices. Our economic system that's based on growth, the constant expansion of our material and energy use on a finite planet that's already in serious trouble, needs urgently to change. The for-profit motive is eating away at our chances for a sustainable future. And education is fast becoming an industry as opposed to a common good. The funding of academia by industry means that industry sets and restricts the agenda, just like government funding of NGOs restricts the ability to be critical of and hold governments to account. And then tied into this is the exhausting labour conditions and job insecurity. In the NGO world, projects are funded but not salaries or overheads. And likewise in academia, there's little time for teaching preparation or independent research. So we're being squeezed into survival mode and funneled into acquiescence. And then this leaves us less able to challenge such concepts as the Sustainable Development Goals. The Centre for Global Education have produced a very useful resource on how to critically analyse the goals. And then just to lift out a few points briefly, well, we have goal 1, no poverty by 2030. Yet if everyone received the minimum $1.90, millions would still be in poverty. It's far too low, and it also ignores the huge variances of cost of living globally. And then I've already spoken about the problem with goal 8, economic growth, and it's hard to overemphasize how this presents a fundamental contradiction with many of the other goals. Equality cannot be achieved in a capitalist system. So we also need to be more aware of power, recognize where and how power is acting. So can we really be impartial or objective in this messy world? Taking the example of being a researcher of a conflict between a mining company and a community. So we have such disparity here in terms of access to resources and power that to be impartial, we're simply perpetuating these unjust power dynamics. I'm part of a network of practitioners called the Active Hope Ireland Network, and we're attempting to embark on the process of decolonising our practice and ourselves. This is another very deep and complex issue, of course, but one which we must begin in earnest if we're to break the chain of global injustice and leave it behind in the old world. So in my experience, I've encountered academia at its best, where it is serving and questioning. When I first came back from Peru, I attended a symposium organised by Professor Karen Till of the Geography Department of the Maynooth University, where her and her team brought together artists and activists and academics to address the issues of place, memory and social justice. So researchers here not only hope to investigate, but also contribute. And this idea is also reflected in the formation of the Environmental Justice Network Ireland, where academics listen to and serve communities. We're currently working on a joint project with HEI on the rights of communities and rights of nature. I'm also working with a PhD candidate from the University of Galway, Vincenza Serifis, who defines herself as an activist researcher, abandoning the futile attempt at impartiality. Friends of the Earth are part of the Belfast Climate Commission, and I participate in the working group on grassroots and community engagement, where we're using participatory action research as a tool for reflective action. But unfortunately, these examples are not mainstream and come up against funding and institutional hurdles. Yet hopefully both academia and the NGO world find ways to step away from the system that has brought us these multiple crises that we now face, and join communities in the creation of a more just and sustainable future. So I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Great, Lynda. Thank you very much for those opening remarks. Very insightful and also challenging, which is the purpose of this discussion series. So thanks for posing those questions, and also giving us an insight into the diversity of your work. You're active across a very wide range of areas. So thanks for giving an insight into that. And thank you to all of the panelists for their opening contributions. We will now move into a broader discussion among the panel. A reminder again to our audience to please pose questions to panelists using the chat function on Zoom. So I have a pair of questions that I want to throw open to the panel as a whole, and so one of them asks basically what higher education can do to better engage with civil society and with society in general, and the other question asks what society can do to better engage with the higher education sector. But rather than necessarily posing each, so we have three people from the academic sector and 3 people from policy and civil society and activism, but rather than posing one set of questions to one side and another set of questions to the other, I'd like to pose both questions to all 5 panelists. And some of our panelists have already touched on these themes, but feel free to come in on any of these. So the first question is how higher education staff can be encouraged or facilitated to engage with wider society on sustainability agendas. And I guess implicit in that question is something about the way that we organize higher education, the funding models we had, going to some of the points that Lynda picked up on there. So that's an opening question. Can I put that to the panel? And at this stage, please feel free to jump in or let me know visually if you'd like to come in on that question. Yeah, Su-Ming.
So I think it starts with the question and the starting point. So I think the way in which we engage is we don't have our questions first and then engage. I think it comes from finding the shared questions and how, ways of working through them. I think that's the first start. And I think for us as researchers, engaging that research head, and also as teachers, thinking about, the way that we teach, having praxis methodologies, ways that bring us into reflection, but also action, that we have both research methods and teaching methods that put these more front and center. These ways of doing research and doing teaching have been really seen as a poor relation in the past, and I definitely think that they shouldn't be. They really, they also encapsulate very important skills in listening, facilitation, bridging different perspectives, cultural competencies. So there are many kind of skills and aptitudes that are very important for researchers and teachers to have. So I think that they're kind of where I would go looking. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Su-Ming. Would anyone else, Sam?
Yeah, so I guess I agree with that, and I guess catching on Sabrina's point of this kind of living lab model, where if we can find academics who are willing to engage in real life action projects, and whether we're using our campus, which we do on many different projects at the moment, to demonstrate whether it's new technologies or new methodologies, because I guess our campus is kind of like a mini city. And so if we can actually demonstrate stuff on the campus that can then be scaled to a broader city scale, then that's a positive way of people starting to take a first step of engagement into it. I guess Sabrina mentioned our MOU with between the university and the city, which is a really nice stepping point to go, okay, here's whether it's a problem posed by our city that we're residing in that we can actually help to actually provide a solution on. Or whether it is something that, something has been developed on this side that we can take to the city and go, well, can we help and demonstrate this in the city for a better solution? I think those are the steps to actually start making it. But I would also say that we still have a significant road to travel on the engaging a much broader breadth of the academics within the academic community. So this is not just from a DCU perspective, but how do we do this much more collaboratively, so that we're not reinventing wheels, so that we're not trying to actually get a one-upmanship so that DCU did this and we did it before Trinity did it. How can we actually do this together and save an awful lot of time and resources in doing it that way?
And Karl, before I come to you, Sam, can I ask you maybe to, and this goes to what Sabrina was talking about in Canada, different universities working together. Sam, you chair an Irish Universities Association group of sustainability managers, isn't that
Yes.
correct? Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
So the IUA, which is the Irish Universities Association, we have a sustainability working group. And so the idea is the sustainability managers now, and not all of the Irish universities have a sustainability manager. So in a lot of them, or in some of them at least, it's their energy managers. We've come together to look at particularly, the first task was looking at a methodology for how we calculate carbon footprints, because using carbon as a kind of a current currency to measure our impacts, and how can we look at that so that we can understand first where our impacts are before we start rolling out initiatives to actually reduce those impacts. So, but then how do we do it together? And that was the whole idea of having an IUA working group, was working together, we will get a joint solution that has the best inputs and best practice from all. And that has led on then to other projects. So we're currently running a project across that working group that's funded by the EPA, using our campuses, all the campuses, as living labs to demonstrate technologies or to demonstrate methodologies and behavioral changes, interventions that are needed, looking at waste management. So, but those are just different stepping stones. So it's all working, and it very much focused on collaboration.
Thanks very much, Sam. Karl, you were going to come in there.
Yeah, really interested in how you move from individual local initiatives in different departments, different parts of the university, quite often in the professional services as well, the people in the estates department or whatever, how you move from that to a more holistic approach of the whole institution. And I think what is happening at the moment is a move across the sector, certainly in the UK, and I would expect and hope that this is happening in Ireland as well, where you're moving away from it being a set of individual initiatives by people who are committed to this area to an institutional commitment. And I think there are a number of ways in which institutions have been encouraged to take that institutional commitment through, for example, signing the SDG Accord or some of the other international things, signing up to the, to those initiatives. My experience at Aberdeen was when I arrived, we were just launching a strategy or beginning to develop a strategy, and there was a lot of push in this space. What we wanted to talk about, inclusive, interdisciplinary, international. Where did we get the most engagement? Was our fourth theme, sustainable. That's where people crowded in. People were anxious to get the voice heard. And I think what was missing from your question is engagement with the student body. It's the student body that's accelerating the thinking of the university strategic direction. So they encourage us, not net zero by 2040, but before 2040. We said we would educate all our students to be leaders in environmental change. They said, what about your staff? Why is it just us? So they stood up in Senate and said, no, it's got to be students. And so I think if you can harness the power of the student voice in terms of the transformation of what you're trying to achieve within the university context, they are the ones who've also got that power to go out and volunteer in the local community, to work regionally, as well. So I think there is a moment that things like COP26 are driving a requirement, certainly in Scotland, but across the UK. Quite interested that I don't see as much of that in Ireland, if I'm honest. I don't see as much signing up to the SDG Accord. I don't see as much institutional feedback that is very clearly indicating that this is number one on our list of things that are coming forward from us. So I'm quite interested to see why that is and how we can make sure that that's reflected somehow, and perhaps it becomes more of a major focus of, for example, the task force.
Well, that's a good challenge to throw down to the higher education sector here. Karl, I was struck over recent weeks by the campaigns for Provost of Trinity College Dublin, and so, you know, not being engaged in any way in Trinity, I was just seeing it play out on Twitter. But you know, there were really strong, from what I could see, really quite strong commitments being made by the three candidates on sustainability, and indeed Lynda Doyle, who was the successful candidate, was a speaker in our first webinar in this series. So congratulations to her. I don't know, do Lynda or Sabrina want to come in on that, or because the next question I have is looking at this from the other side of that relationship, the higher education society relationship, and around how societal actors can better engage with higher education on sustainability challenges. You know, are there constraints? Are there systemic constraints? Lynda, you were talking about you know, some strong constraints as you see it in the setup of higher education. But do Sabrina or Lynda or anyone else on the panel have other thoughts on that, and how maybe institutionally members of staff on the outside of higher education can be better incentivized to engage with higher education? Lynda, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose like initiatives, like I mentioned, like the Environmental Justice Network Ireland, and what Su-Ming was talking about in the chat there about in NUI Galway, community university partnership, you know, like initiatives like this that like bring community universities together like in a meaningful way are very useful, and also that communities can trust that like whatever is researched like comes back to them in an accessible way. It's like there's an academic language that kind of goes over a lot of people's heads, so that any collaboration is like the outworkings of it is fully accessible to the community, and that like they can take that and use it, you know. So maybe that, and yeah, that's it for now, really.
Thanks, Lynda. Sabrina and
Sam can go. I think, or just trying to think, like one of the things I think that's really great about having a partnership with academic institutions is, just as even Lynda's saying, is there's communities might trust better what comes out of an academic institution. I think I bluntly put it a while back that there's trust in elbow patches, and that we know that there are ethics and attached to this, that the researcher is going to do something that's objective. And then it's up to us to inform how that informs policy. In terms of how we can better engage with any tertiary institution, I think that, or higher education, is, I think the reason we need it is also the reason we're challenged to do it, is sometimes we're too busy. So when Diarmuid and Sam, you come to us and you say, hey, we've got these students, or, you know, do you have anything that they can work on? That actually kickstarts us and reminds us that we're in a city with access to so many students, so much intelligence, so much brilliant ideas, that we that it kicks us to do the thing and ask you guys for help. And I think we just need to get better at communicating what's out there. I think we don't often, it's not our first port of call to go and say, well, what programs, what professor is doing this, how might it actually impact what I do? So I think we need to actually, from our side, get better and ask that question of like, what's going on at DCU, what's going on at Maynooth, what's going on at Trinity, what's going on at UCD, what's going on at TU Dublin, because there are so many different research units. And I think that's maybe equally a challenge that both HEIs face and the local authority face. It's unique in that we're probably both not very good at advertising and getting that advertising to other organizations. So it's something maybe we all can work on together collaboratively to do better, so that we get that out there and that we actually strengthen that.
Sure. I mean, my perspective working in a HEI is, even before COVID, I often didn't have much of a clue what was going on in the rest of the university. And I used to joke that the best opportunity I had to meet colleagues outside of my own school was the annual fire drill, because you're just thrown outside the building and you get to meet whoever happens to be out there. And of course, COVID and all of us working from home makes that even more challenging. Sam, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just I guess a little bit to build on Sabrina's point that the ad hoc part has to get taken to a higher level. So yes, we need the students' voices to force us to do stuff, but of course, if we don't make the changes now, then those students are going to really leave us on the side of the road when it comes to our retirement. If the changes have not been made, that they're going to get left with the outcomes of. But I think there's other societal actors within the system that actually have a direct impact on us as HEIs as well. So there is the likes of the professional accreditation bodies, and say Engineers Ireland has recently reworked its entire accreditation process so that it now requires the sustainability competencies, the actual competencies, to be included in their programs. So that if you want your degree to be accredited by Engineers Ireland, then you have to include these, which makes it so much easier. The same as I'm on a working group for the European Commission looking at the Mari Shradovsky-Curie program. Really difficult to pronounce that one. But we are developing a green charter for that predominantly transport related program to see, can we actually put in place a charter where researchers will have to sign up to a sustainability commitment as part of their research. And it's that top down rather than just requiring the institutions to drive it from the bottom, because in a way that levels the competition field as well, because if it's coming from the top down, then we're all having to do it, rather than actually one institution saying that, well, we're going to reduce the number of flights that every academic is going to be allowed to take, which then puts them at a disadvantage to others within other areas. So those higher level organizational ones that come down from the top, or legislation and regulations, I think also need to play a part in how we're going to progress these engagements.
Sam, can I maybe follow up on that and also your opening remarks and link them to Lynda's opening remarks about, I guess, the nature of the higher education system, because I think higher education, in common with other facets of society, faces the challenge of incrementalism versus transformational change, and so my question to all of the panel is what the best approach is to the transformation, and how to balance the need to, on the one hand, bring staff and perhaps not students, because as it's been noted, students are often ahead of us on this journey, but on the one hand, to bring our colleagues with us on this journey, with, on the other hand, the need for radical change, perhaps also, as Lynda was arguing in her opening remarks, the need to rethink the broader model of higher education. So a simple question for all of you. Karl.
So one of my reflections about COVID and its impact has been, I think it offers the opportunity for transformational thinking in a way that was just not possible before. Things that we thought were absolutely impossible, that, for example, your academic career would not necessarily have to be driven by flying around the world to distant places to give a 30-minute paper and do a bit of networking. You know, if you tried to say to somebody, I'm sorry, we're as a university are not going to be funding that anymore, we're not going to be doing it anymore, we're going to have a sustainable transport policy, you know, that was a hard sell. I think now it's a much easier sell. I think that the pandemic opens up probably the biggest opportunity for radical transformation in what we do, both as universities, but also in relation to the climate, of any possible thing in our lifetimes, really. It needs that outward shock that allows people to think differently. So I think there's opportunities for universities now and for society more broadly to take that change, that freeing up. So, you know, we're debating our home working policy, things that we thought were nobody would ever allow people to go and work, pick their kids up from home, from school at 3 o'clock and just leave the office and then maybe, you know, get them settled in the garden or whatever, and then go back to their work. That would have been massively radical, that people would allow a different kind of approach to work-life balance and so on. So I think there is an opportunity, and that's why we have to seize this now around environmental transformation, around ways of working, around not being competitive with each other as universities, working as a system. What I like about Ireland, just as with Scotland, it's small enough, it should be working as a single system, as we do in Scotland, for example, around learning and teaching, where we have enhancement themes for the whole country and we work together over a period of 3 years. There are opportunities, I think, for the Irish system to work as a single system. It's that size of country, that size of system. But there are opportunities here to think completely differently that weren't there 18 months ago.
Karl, could I maybe just pick up on one thing you said at the end there about collaboration and the fact that Scotland, like Ireland, is small enough. How do you deliver that kind of collaboration? You know, is it a cultural issue? Is it about funding mechanisms and, you know, kind of incentivizing universities to work together? What's the Scottish experience in your view around how you deliver that collaborative higher education environment?
So I've got most experience. There's been a couple of big initiatives in Scotland over the years. One has been in learning and teaching, where, as I say, through the Quality Assurance Agency, we established these 3-year enhancement themes where we all work together. And there's a bit of funding in that. So the Scottish Funding Council decided to fund the QAA and the Scottish Government to promote that change, to promote that collaborative working. And I think that that's worked really well. And I was privileged to lead one of those enhancement themes for a couple of years. The other thing that happened in Scotland was research pooling and bidding for big UK and international funding schemes. So, for example, there are doctoral training centres in the UK, and typically Scotland bids. So we have a Scotland-wide arts and humanities and social science doctoral training centre. So I do think funding is important. It requires political leadership, and it requires you know, in a way, it also requires the sector to work together in order to generate the income from abroad. So we try and sell ourselves as Scottish higher education worldwide. I think there's an opportunity. People are beginning to think post-Brexit there's an opportunity for Ireland to sell itself as an attractive destination for English-speaking students, for example. So sometimes there are common ways of working. We work really well in Scotland. We have University of Scotland, which works collectively as a body for all of the HEIs in Scotland. So funding, I think small amounts of funding are a huge motivator. I've always been amazed in my career how academics will go after, you know, £1,000 here to get a group together, or a few thousand here. People need that seed corn money, as you say, to bring people together, not just because of fire alarms, but because there's something they really care about, and somebody's prepared to oil the wheels. So we're beginning to think in the commission, or in the group, whether there are ways in which we could incentivize collaborative, collective working, as opposed to competition between institutions, which is what we see we look south to England and see a system that is very much, quite individualistic, although people build regional alliances, but it doesn't work really as a national system in quite the same way anymore.
Great. Sabrina. Yeah.
Just picking up on something that Karl said there, and just thinking about my own experience in Singapore and in France, like the schools that I was attending were, it speaks to that collaboration piece where it can happen more internationally. I think what was interesting about the public policy school at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in NUS and say Sciences Po, as well as LSE and Columbia at the time, is like you have 4 different institutions. And I think there's actually a few more, HEIs and even the university in Tokyo, that the schools built this network. And what was interesting, and Karl picked up, and I think we've all picked up on it, where the schools are educating us in a specific field of public policy, that we would be, the idea is that we'd all be go and be global leaders. And I think there's something around the advertisement that students provide and communicating and giving that impetus for collaboration, is that you're teaching these students in the program that they have to collaborate. The program is very global. It is forcing you to work with across different ethnic groups, cultures, everything. You're being forced to think differently in that situation, and you're expected to go out into the world and kind of work through those things. So I think there's something around how that collaboration can be encouraged. And the other thing, I think what stuck with me when I was in Singapore was the school's view was that you're an ambassador for the school at the end of the day. And we've even had this conversation about, and maybe that's something Irish institutions can remember, is the students are ambassadors for the school, they're ambassadors for the future as well.
Yeah.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sabrina. Can I pick up on the theme of COVID as a critical juncture, as a radical destabilizing moment that allows us to think differently? Which Karl flagged there. Do any of the other panelists want to come in on how we can seize that opportunity? Sam.
Again, I'd just like to reiterate on Karl's point, and that, using our carbon footprint methodology, where we measure scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 of all of the impacts of the university, one of the second largest contributor to our carbon emissions is staff and student commuting to and from the campus. And of course, in 2020, that dropped to practically zero. Now, that's not what we want as a future, because we want our students to have some on-campus experience, because I don't think any of them ever signed up for an online degree. That's not what they're at, and that's not what they wanted when they were going to college. But I think we need to look at that data and really go, well, how do we actually re-change the system so that that makes more sense? So whether it is that they only have to, if they're driving, they have to drive to campus 2 days or 3 days a week, rather than, they have 1 hour lectures on each of the 5 days a week. Or if you're doing a working from home policy, that you do look at that as when you're looking at your timetabling, so that your timetable is appropriate, so they don't tell somebody, yes, they can have a working from home policy, but yeah, you're going to actually have to lecture every day in any case. And that hardly makes sense. So we do need to look at the system, at the big picture of what's going on and where those impacts are coming from, because the largest contributor to our carbon footprint comes from procurement, comes from all of the stuff we buy as an institution. And procurement has one of these great powers that we can actually change much easier than whether we can get people out of planes, because it's so important to do face-to-face meetings at bits and pieces. Now, I do think that the remote participation technologies and people's use of it will have, I think there'll be a dip when we come out, because everybody's going to go, I'm not going back on Zoom again. But I do think it will come back, because I think people have learned the skills and the methodologies for using Zoom appropriately, or Zooming whatever remote participation technology appropriately. I think we need to continue to support that and encourage it, and look at, I don't know, I would really love to give every academic a kind of a carbon footprint or a carbon budget, and go, right, run your academic career on that, and you know what, it's built into your promotional materials, so that you have to stay below a number. And but I probably get shot if I actually say go much further on that.
Thanks, Sam. Lynda, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just to build on what Karl was saying about how COVID has shown us that in a very short timeline, you know, and I suppose also looking as well about how governments can support us in ways previously thought impossible. The likes of, if you look at both the North and the South, how the government supported people to keep on receiving a wage when they couldn't go to work. And that actually there is a magic money tree after all. I'm just I suppose learning how the economy actually works, you know, in terms of deficit and debt, and looking at modern monetary theory and actually understanding that governments can borrow money into being, and governments can make these huge funding decisions, you know, as opposed to bailing out big industry. They could fund fully higher education for all citizens, you know, like when you look at, it's not just fees that put many people off going to higher education, but it's also like the hidden costs. So for higher education to be fully accessible to everyone with all economic means, you know, that's something that governments could support and do in other countries. So yeah, and then that would change also the spectrum of who the students are and what they're getting up to, you know. So yeah, and then also I suppose COVID has made us realize like the importance of health and well-being, and that, you know, maybe a move to a well-being economy is ever more needed. And also just building on what Samantha was saying about procurement, like universities have huge procurement possibilities. So the likes of the idea of community wealth building, where procurement is directed to local cooperatives to build like strong democratic local economies, something that's very possible that can be done right now and hugely change the landscape.
Thanks, Lynda. Sabrina, see you have your hand up, but I might come to you in a closing round of comments, because we are coming towards the end of our allotted time now. And I wanted to fold in an opportunity for all of our panelists to for a closing intervention with a question that Pat Mehigan has put in the chat, which is, and some of you have touched on this already, but the question is, what systematic change could HEI sector implement to reduce emissions and make immediate impact? Collaboration is great, but time is of the essence. And the sector is still expanding, building, consuming. So I think this comes back to that question about kind of systemic change, which is a challenging question, but I want to put that to each of our panelists, along with an opportunity for any closing remarks you'd like to make. With your permission, I'll come back to the panel in the order in which we started. So that means, Sam, you're first.
Yes, we do keep building, and we keep building bad buildings. I mean, they're less bad than the current buildings that we have, but they're still bad buildings, which is really scary. And it kind of follows from Lynda's point that, you know, we can find the money, because of course we as a public institution, we don't have that money. We are funded by government to actually do it. And it's not that we can't build good buildings, we can. We just are only funded to build, or at least those are the priorities. The priority is on the space rather than on the actual green. And I guess if I was to look at closing remarks, it would be, yes, we need to make huge systematic change. We need to actually step back and look at what we're doing and actually go, what is the big changes that we need to make? And they are radical changes. They are not just these tinkering at the edges changes. They have to look at the impacts we're having. And some of this is going to come from legislation and regulation. So we have to reduce by 51% our absolute emissions from energy by 2030, which is going to be a huge challenge as we build bad buildings, as long as everything else. But those challenges are going to be what is going to push us down that road. It would be good that we would do them collaboratively and address them together so that we can actually look at, I guess, more joined up thinking solutions rather than each individual institution trying to actually figure out the solution themselves.
Great. Thanks, Sam. Su-Ming.
So I'm back to the termites then, and what they've been eating away at. So I'd like to propose that higher education institutions don't think of higher education as a set of buildings, and they don't seek to build buildings, but they focus more on the mission and the purpose and the activities that take place inside those buildings, the co-creation of knowledge and and learning, teaching, learning, communicating knowledge. So that would be my you know, kind of that those things have been chewed away, I think, as we have focused on the, you know, the buildings concept of, you know, this is why we have big grants, this is why we need to have a university, and it's created this idea that the university is an ever-growing collection of ever larger buildings. Yeah, I don't think that that's sustainable. Great. Or desirable.
Thanks, Su-Ming. Karl.
So I'm a humanities scholar and I believe in the power of storytelling. For me, what we need is an absolutely compelling narrative, first of all, about why change is needed. And I think that needs to be allied to really compelling data and evidence. So my theory of change and the way I try to bring about change through my leadership roles is give people the evidence, give them a powerful story about what it is that we're trying to do here, and then empower them to exercise leadership locally, exercise leadership at all levels, because this cannot be top down, nor can it be bottom up. It needs that combination of a really powerful story about, you know, what is happening to our planet. People get that, but they watch it on telly and they get, you know, an Attenborough film and then they forget about it. But that narrative needs to be right in front of us all the time to get the sense of what level of change is needed. And they need to see the data, because academics, I think, and policymakers, they do respond to data. And I think you need that combination of a really powerful narrative, a really compelling set of data, and then an empowerment that we really mean this, we are going to do something about it. And then you can get buy-in, I think. And, you know, we've all got brilliant storytellers in our institutions. We've got Pete Smith in our institution, FRS, does brilliant work with the UN and on soil science and so on. We got him in front of our Senate. You know, there's an electricity goes through the institution when he explains with that academic credibility, guys, we need to stop eating less, you know, stop eating meat, for example, or think about the carbon footprint of the dairy industry. People actually need that kind of storytelling that's compelling by top people who know how to tell that story, give you the data, and then fire people up.
Thank you, Karl. Sabrina, over to you.
My head went all over the place as everybody was talking. And the first thing that came to mind was thinking back to my undergrad. And the one thing that made a difference in how I got to university was having a free bus pass. And I actually worked with the girl that fought for a free bus pass for all university students as part of your tuition. And that created a habit. Then listening to Sam say, we got to stop building, my head then went to, well, some students live off student campus. Then how do we as a city, you know, and then thinking of a conversation my partner and I had about security of tenure and renting and all those pieces, like how do we make students who may after their degree finish choose to stay in the city? Then I was thinking of Su-Ming and what she was saying about, do we build more buildings? No. Do we? Then it's that question and going back to the timetabling, how do we integrate into their practicums that allow students maybe to work collaboratively in groups? Like that might change the emissions that come from this, and that might lead them to a more sustainable future. And then it is that practical piece. So there's many options. I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think it is us thinking about all the little bits critically. And on Karl's point about data, and I think even Diarmuid and I were, you know, working on the policy evaluation, we know that if data is used in one way, that it's not going to give an answer. It will give an answer, but it might not give a fully formed answer. So how we use the data is the other challenge. So I think, yeah, I don't have a solid answer.
Thanks very much, Sabrina. Not one answer, but lots of answers. Lynda, finally, over to you.
Yeah, my closing remarks aren't going to be very coherent either. Yeah, I suppose just it's the same, yeah, going back to systematic change, you know, we need change, and as someone mentioned in the chat, you know, our student voices important, they're hugely important, you know, especially now with students paying for their education. So they really, at the end of the day, they have the power, they can take their business elsewhere, you know. Yeah, and both students and academic staff, like if they challenge the of these crises, you know, as opposed to plasters on top, like and then also that goes to, as I was saying earlier, like the NGO world as well, and local government, you know, it's kind of like we can't skirt around the edges anymore. We need to deal with the root cause of all this, and also while doing that, like building the alternative, you know, like living the alternative now. Yeah, so that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Lynda, and thank you to all of our panelists. On behalf of myself and of the audience, can I thank each of you for taking the time today to share your expertise and insights with us, and for engaging in such an interesting and rich discussion. Thank you very much, Sam, Su-Ming, Karl, Sabrina, and Lynda. And I know that as we've been speaking, a parallel, sometimes parallel discussion has been evolving in the chat function. So I hope that our audience, and also I saw various comments from our panelists in the written chat. So I hope you had an opportunity to engage with that as well. Before wrapping up, I'd like to draw your attention to the third and final webinar in this Future Earth Ireland series on how higher education can build forward better, which will take place in just over 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, the 28th of April at 3 p.m. An Eventbrite link to register for the third webinar has been shared by Jennifer Keneally in the chat here, and we'll be pushing that out on social media and on relevant mailing lists as well. The third webinar will focus on the theme of teaching and learning, and that picks up on some of the questions in the chat and some of the discussion we've had today. It'll feature Professor Sarah Cullity, Director of the UCC Environmental Research Institute, Michelle O'Dowd, Sustainability Officer at NUI Galway, Professor Kerry Fasser from the University of Bristol, Aoife Cannon from the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and Julian Nagy, Vice President for Education of Maynooth University Students' Union. So I hope to see many of you on the 28th of April for that third and final webinar in the series. But for now, thank you once again to our panelists and to you, our audience, for your participation. Goodbye.